Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Okay, welcome again. So, we were discussing our principle number 3, rational people think at margin. Okay. So, that we have clarified using an airlines example, if you can remember, right. So, that kind of thing, there is an apparent, what should I say, paradox in real life. Sometimes it is called water diamond paradox, water diamond paradox. Okay. So, there also with this example also you will realize that how this principle number 3, rational people think at margin, that has important role. Okay. See, water and diamond, two commodities we are taking here, right, and you can understand that water is extremely necessary, precious commodities for our sustenance, right. It is an essential commodity, right. So, its utility or its utilization in our daily life is enormous. Vis-a-vis diamond, almost no that much utility, it is not an essential commodity for our sustenance, right. But if you real life, if you see that price at least in India, price of water is very negligible or very cheap, water is very cheap, vis-a-vis diamond is very expensive. Okay. So, apparently it is a paradox because one commodity, it is paradox because one commodity is so much of useful for our daily life, but its price is very less. Vis-a-vis another commodity is not that much useful, perhaps negligible kind of usefulness it has in our daily life, but its price is huge. So, apparently it is a paradoxical kind of thing. So, why? If we try to understand that why, then you will realize that this marginal principle is there, because water is plenty, it is not that much scarce like diamond, right. So, people are willing to pay very less amount for additional quantity of water at the margin. So, at the margin, for margin means for 1 unit of additional quantity of that goods, how much I am willing to pay, okay, and that is the price, right. So, people are willing to pay very less for additional 1 extra gallon of water or something like that, right. Besides, diamond is very scarce, okay, very scarce, and that is why although it does not have almost no use in our daily life, but since it is very scarce, right, people are willing to pay huge amount of money for that. Okay. So, that is why although it is not that much useful at all in our daily life, okay, but people are willing to pay many more for that. So, this at the margin, what is the benefit you are earning by occupying or by utilizing that commodity vis-a-vis, so that is called marginal benefit, and whatever you are willing to sacrifice for that commodity, that is called marginal cost. So, in our decision making at every life, so if I am a rational person, okay, it should be we should compare between marginal benefit and marginal cost, and if marginal benefit is more than marginal cost or marginal benefit exceeds marginal cost, we should take decision in favor of that, or we should purchase that commodity. Okay. So, that is the rational people think at margin. Okay. Then our fourth principle, that is called people respond to incentives. So, let me clarify what is this. Say suppose something happened in real life, you will realize that people, all the economic agents like me, you, whoever else are there in this society, they will respond if some change happens vis-a-vis something what was there earlier. I will give an example, you will understand. Not only that, people will respond to that thing that changes, different group of people may respond differently. Suppose for some reason apple price suddenly, yesterday it was 100 rupee per kg, today it is 200 rupee per kg. Okay, so apple price increases. Okay, look at here, at least with that particular commodity apple, okay, two groups of people are there who are interacting with that commodity. One group I can tell seller or grower of that apple, another group a consumer, purchaser of that apple who are purchasing from the market. So, if apple price increases for some reason, right, you know immediately that people who are consumer, who are purchasing apple from the market for their consumption purpose, they will try to consume little bit less, okay, because its price has increased and you do not have unlimited amount of money in your pocket, because again you have to face trade off, some limited amount of money is there in your pocket, and with that money you have to allocate or you have to maintain your entire family, some food items, some clothing items, shelter and all whatever we need for our subsistence, right. So definitely as a consumer I will try to purchase probably little bit less amount of apple because its price is increased. Okay. Now look at so consumers will try to purchase less. Look at the situation, the people who are growing apple, right, producers of apple, what they will do? Since apple price has increased, they will perhaps try to produce more because that will give them more income, right. So any kinds of changes, whatever happens in real life, okay, people immediately adjust their behavior accordingly, and that adjustment we are telling response. People respond, this respond, quote unquote term respond, by that we are referring that adjustment of the people's behavior, and whatever the change is happening, that we are telling as incentive. Okay. Okay. We can sometimes see what is the usefulness of this course, this economics. Perhaps after down the line, after few years, some of you people will be the policy makers of the government, right. So when government is going to take some policies, some economic policies, right, you have to be very careful, you have to being the advisor to the government, you have to keep in your mind all the alternative possibilities that can appear, right. We will give an example why I am telling that, okay, so that your policy what you will recommend to the government, that will be more informative, more judicious kind of thing. Look at one example, say there is a study in US in 1960s or 1970s, there is a study. So these days in highway driving, wearing the seat belt is the mandatory thing, right, but those days it was not. Okay, when you are driving a car, four wheeler, right, putting up your seat belt was not mandatory those days. So what is happening, a lot of accidents is inevitable in the highways, right, some accidents are happening. So and with all those, most of the accidents, for the drivers, they are getting killed. Okay. So for the precaution of the drivers and all other passengers, right. So in US there is a law came into the existence in 1960s or 70s, sometimes back. Okay. So wearing seat belt is a mandatory thing. So that is a new law came that incentivizes people in different way. What happens when policymakers bring that law into the picture? What was the target? Target is to save the life of the drivers or life of the travelers in that passenger car, right. What happens when seat belt is mandatory? Now look at the perspective from the drivers. Driver is thinking that even if accidents now occurs, the possibility of getting more hurt when I am not putting seat belt and vis-a-vis when I am putting seat belt, now getting hurt is less possible, right. So this law is actually making rash driving more. Okay. As a result, what is happened? Number of accidents increases. Okay. Number of death of the drivers or that car drivers, it improves or it came down little bit, but not significantly it came down because number of accidents increases, right, and number of pedestrian death has increased a huge amount because lot of accidents are happening now. Okay. So look at here, why I am telling this, what kind of different ways associated stakeholders can behave, can respond. vis-a-vis one policies when some policy makers are taking, right. You have to be very careful when you are going to give that policy advice to the government to be implemented, right. So, this is the one thing, one way something was in the focus target in the mind of the policy makers and something completely something else is happening. Okay. Exactly same thing can happen, I do not know whether that happens or not. See, suppose in a voluntary retirement scheme VRS, many of you perhaps heard about this terminology. So, in a government organization, okay, if say in a government office, so whatever amount of works are there, okay, vis-a-vis number of workers or number of employees are required, suppose 10 employees are required in an office and actually 12 employees are already employed for some reason, right. So, government wants to cut down that number of employees to bring it to 10, right. So, one respectable way to give the VRS voluntary retirement scheme, okay, that offer to the employees, people who are willing, they can take their retirement benefit and they can voluntarily retire from their job. Okay. So, obviously government may have or policymakers may have this kind of objective in their mind that with this kind of offer to all the employees, perhaps who are the less efficient employees who do not want to work that much, right, they will take VRS, okay, and they will go. But what can happen, no, who are the more efficient people, they can take VRS because they will get all the retirement benefits and all, and they can try to find out some job in the maybe corporate sector, right. So, when government is going to offer this VRS scheme, okay, or when you being the policy makers or policy advisors to the government, you are recommending government to take that VRS scheme, okay, or offer that VRS scheme to the employees, right, you have to keep in your mind all those possibilities, right. If you keep only in your mind that with this proposal, I think only inefficient people will take VRS and go out of the system, you are completely wrong, you may be completely wrong, right. Yes, some inefficient people also can take, right. So, all the phenomena, okay, what could be there, different stakeholders may respond differently against this kind of incentivizing kind of scheme, the scheme what you are launching, right. So, when you are, so essential crux or essential message of this thing is that when you are going to take a decision making or some policy changes, right, you are going to take, right, you have to be very judicious, you have to keep in your mind all possible options, okay, how people or how different stakeholders can respond, okay, and accordingly you have to take or you have to choose the best possible policies to be offered, right. So, that we are telling that people respond, since we already learned that people respond to different sorts of incentives and different group of people responds differently, like apple growers and apple consumers kind of example, like seat belt kind of example, like voluntary retirement scheme kind of example. So, alternative, all sort of alternative kinds of response you have to keep in your mind and accordingly you have to propose the best one. Okay. So, now the 4 principles, let us summarize those 4 principles. If you realize, if you critically look into these 4 principles, right, these are basically about one individual decision making thing, one person, okay, or one household or one firm, when he or she or that organization, when they are going to take a decision making, given the surrounding, given the perspective within which they belong, right, how they behave. So, these 4 principles what we have discussed until now, these 4 principles we can think of as the how individual person's decision making is guided by these 4 principles. Now, we will discuss 6, we told that total 10 principles are there. So, 4 principles we have completed. Now, principle number 5, okay, trade can make each party better off, each party better off. Okay. So, now you understand. So, next three principles what we will discuss, you will realize that these three principles are basically how two different individuals or two different group of individuals are interact among themselves, are interacting among themselves, or they interact among themselves. Okay. So, first the trade can be, so when we are bringing trade, it is basically exchange in a market, right. So, you know that trade when it happens between, it is between two parties, right. It trade may be with a good or with some service or whatever it is, one seller is there, one buyer is there. Okay. So, this principle is telling that if two parties involve into trade, that will be beneficial to both the parties, right. We'll bring a specific kind of example, okay, with the trade, how it can make both parties better off. Okay. Very crude example what I give those, say you are going to the market, okay, you are purchasing a pen by 10 rupee. Okay. So, you are giving the 10 rupee to the seller and you are collecting that pen from the seller, right. Can we think of that it is beneficial for both of us? Definitely, from the seller's perspective, look at when he is selling that pen by 10 rupee to you, definitely cost of production of that pen to that seller may be at most 10 rupee, either 10 rupee or less than that, okay, because he is getting some profit margin also, perhaps its cost of production is 9 rupee. Okay. So, he is getting 1 rupee profit on that one pen. Right. So, by selling that pen in 10 rupees to you, he is getting something, he is getting some benefit, right. Now, the question is what kind of benefit you are getting as a consumer or as a purchaser of that cell and that pen, right. When you are paying 10 rupee to that seller to get that pen, definitely the valuation of that pen is more than 10 rupee to you. Usually, we do not think in that way. What is the valuation of a pen what I am purchasing from the market? I am sure if we could quantify, because one pen has some utility to me, I can write using that, right, you can write using that, right. So, that kind of utility whatever you are getting by procuring that pen, if somehow we can quantify, perhaps that utility is more than 10 rupee. Okay. Or at least 10 rupee, otherwise you will not be willing to sacrifice 10 rupee to get that pen for sure. Okay. So, with this example you are getting a notion that perhaps in that participating in that transaction, that pen transaction, right, both the parties are getting better off. Okay. But let us take a specific example to understand this a little bit better way or more clarificatory way, how trade can make each party better off. Okay. Here let us bring here a story of two countries with two commodities. Okay. So, two countries are there, this side say England and Portugal, and two commodities say wine and cloth. Okay. Suppose whatever resources each of these two countries England and Portugal has, okay, using that resources, if England can employ its entire resource to production of wine, it can produce only 2 units of wine, whatever unit it is, okay, 2 units of wine. Okay. Alternatively, if England can utilize its entire resources to only cloth production, it can produce 12 units of cloth. Okay. Look, England can't produce 2 units of wine and 12 units of cloth simultaneously, no, either 2 units of cloth, 2 units of wine or 12 units of cloth, or maybe a combination of wine and cloth if it allocates its resources accordingly, some amount of resources into the production of wine and remaining resources into production of cloth and so on. Okay. And suppose for the Portugal case, the situation is exactly opposite. Using whatever its resources has, Portugal has, if it employ the entirely to production of wine, it can produce 12 units of wine, alternatively it can produce 2 units of cloth, right. So, look at here, Portugal has some advantage of wine production over England, and England has some advantage of cloth production over Portugal. Okay. So, Portugal can produce more amount of wine and England can produce more amount of cloth if they specialize only in, or Portugal specialize itself only in wine production and England specialize itself only in cloth production. By specializing what we are referring, although both the commodities they can produce, they are concentrating on production of only one commodity, one of them, like Portugal is in wine and England is in cloth. Okay. So, if they do not participate in trade, so this kind of advantage it is called absolute advantage, absolute advantage. Okay. And this concept is first given by Adam Smith, one economist. He is known as father of economics also, Adam Smith. Okay. So, Adam Smith first give this how trade on the basis of principle of absolute advantage can make each party better off. Okay. So, let us discuss that Adam Smith's principle of absolute advantage and how by engaging into trade both Portugal and England can be better off, okay, in this kind of situation. So, if we draw the production possibility frontier of Portugal and England, suppose we are measuring wine this side and cloth that side. Okay. So, definitely suppose this is 2 and this is 12, this is suppose 2 and this is suppose 12. Okay. So, definitely okay. So, 2 units of cloth and 12 units of wine, that is the Portugal, right. So, I can tell this is the Portugal's production possibility set and this is England's production possibility set, production possibility frontier, England's production possibility frontier, right. So, so long they are not engaged into trade, how much they can consume, England society and Portugal society? Definitely Portugal can consume any point is bounded by this triangular kind of area, red color triangular area in our any point within that, right, Portugal can consume and England can consume any point bounded by this green color triangular area, right. If they each of those countries want to be self sufficient, okay, whatever wine and whatever cloth we need to sustain, okay, we are completely producing within our domestically within our country. Okay. So, definitely red color any point within this red triangular area Portugal can consume, okay, and England any point within this green triangular area England can consume, right. Now, suppose they are not their objective is not to be self sufficient, rather try to consume more. Okay. So, definitely look, suppose since Portugal has absolute advantage in wine production over England and England has absolute advantage in cloth production over Portugal. So, Adam Smith's principle of absolute advantage tells you or advises us that country should specialize in that production where it has absolute advantage. So, as per Adam Smith's principle of absolute advantage, Portugal should specialize in wine production and England should specialize in cloth production, and they should then exchange these two commodities among themselves through trade. Okay. So, in that way, given the entire resources, how much Portugal can produce. So, Portugal is producing 12 units of wine, okay, and England is producing 12 unit of cloth, right, and suppose with this, so I am Portugal, I have 12 units of wine, you are England, okay, you have 12 units of cloth, and we are, because I am specialized, right, I specialized in only wine production, so I can produce only 12 units of wine, okay, you specialized in cloth production, so you can produce only 12 units of cloth, right. Now suppose we decided that we will engage into trade, we will exchange these two commodities among ourselves with a trade ratio, say for instance 1:1. 1:1 trade ratio. By this what we are referring? We are referring that for every units of, I will give 1 unit of wine to you, in return of that I will get 1 unit of cloth. So, 1:1, it is basically if I sell 6 units of wine to you, I will get 6 units of cloth in return from you, right. So, if we use this 1:1 trade ratio and suppose Portugal has 12 units of wine, out of that it will consume 6 units of wine, and remaining 6 units of wine it will give to the England. In return of that it can get 6 units of cloth from England, because trade ratio is 1:1. So, Portugal can consume this point 6 in this 2 dimensional framework. So, look at here, if Portugal can produce wine and cloth both domestically, 6 point is what? So, suppose this is 12, so this is 6 somewhere, and this is 6. So, 6 point is somewhere here. This point 6 means what? 6 units of wine and 6 units of cloth, right here. So, this point beyond the production possibility frontier for both the countries. Okay. Neither England can consume this point nor Portugal can consume this point if they want to produce both the commodities domestically within themselves, right. Because if Portugal wants to produce 1 units of wine, 12 units of wine or 2 units of cloth, right. So, if Portugal allocates its resources accordingly such that it can produce 6 units of wine, then it can get only 1 unit of cloth. So, 6 vis-a-vis 1, this point Portugal can consume if it can produce wine and cloth domestically. Similarly, exactly the same way 6:1, this point England can consume, it can produce if England wants to consume 6 units of cloth and remaining resources for the wine. Okay. Look at here, this 6 point, this point is 6, this point is 6:1, this point is 1:6. This 1:6 means 1 unit of wine and 6 units of cloth. 6:1 means 6 units of wine, 1 unit of cloth. 6:6 means 6 unit of wine and 6 units of cloth. Look at here, the kind of example we have taken, right. If each of them want to be self sufficient, whatever commodities, we assume that it is a very primitive kind of day and only 2 commodities for our understanding, sake of our understanding, we assume only 2 commodities, wine and cloth, and with those 2 commodities they have to sustain. Okay. So, if the message of this how trade can make each party better off, what kind of message we are getting? If each of these 2 countries, the kind of numbers we have taken, using that numbers we can see that if each of them wants to be self sufficient, wants to produce both the commodities, it needs to sustain domestically, right, it can only consume very less amount of both the commodities. Okay. Alternatively, if it follows or both of them follows that principle of absolute advantage as proposed by Adam Smith, following that principle of absolute advantage, each country should specialize in that production, that commodity production where it has absolute advantage. The kind of example we have taken, Portugal has absolute advantage in wine production and England has absolute advantage in cloth production. So, England should specialize only in production of cloth, Portugal should specialize only in production of wine, and then they should engage into trade. And by that picture and by that discussion we can see that 6 point means 6 units of wine and 6 units of cloth, each of them consume, they can consume if they specialize into one commodity production and engage into trade. So, this 6 this point 6 this is becoming or this is a part of consumption possibility, although it is not a within the production possibility of neither of the countries. Okay. So, that means what? That means if they engage into trade vis-a-vis if they do not engage into trade, if they do not engage into trade, whatever they can consume, if they engage into trade they can consume larger things, and when you are consuming more, your standard of living is better than earlier, right. So, this with this example or this or on the basis of principle of absolute advantage, we can successfully demonstrate that how trade can make each party better off. Okay. So, that is our principle number 5. We will continue this principle number 5 discussion in our next lecture. There we will introduce another principle called principle of relative advantage or principle of comparative advantage, that is given by another seminal economist called David Ricardo. Okay. In any case, we will continue that in our next lecture. Take care.